The April rain fell in a steady drizzle as I stood by the polished mahogany casket of my only son. My name is Evelyn Harper, and I am 62 years old. That afternoon, under the gray skies of Greenwood Cemetery, I buried Daniel, my brilliant boy who had been only 38. No mother ever expects to outlive her child, and the cruelty of it left me hollow, standing apart from the mourners as if grief had built a wall no one dared to cross. Across from me stood Samantha, my daughter-in-law, her black Chanel dress clinging to her like it belonged more to a cocktail party than a funeral. She had been married to Daniel for barely 3 years, but somehow she had made herself the center of this ceremony. Her makeup was flawless, untouched by tears, while my own eyes were swollen and red. I had raised Daniel alone after my husband died, but in this moment, Samantha shone as the widow in control, while I faded to the edges. As the mourners began to drift toward their cars, a man approached me, his umbrella tilting slightly against the wind. "Mrs. Harper," he said with a practiced calm. "My name is Jeffrey Palmer. I was Daniel's attorney. The reading of the will has been scheduled at Daniel's apartment in an hour. Your presence is requested." "At the apartment today?" I asked, unable to mask my surprise. "Isn't that rather soon?" He hesitated before answering. Mrs. Hayes Harper insisted we move without delay. Of course she did, I thought bitterly. Samantha had always been impatient when it came to power. I arrived at the penthouse later, stepping into a space that once had been Daniel's sanctuary. Before Samantha, it was filled with his books, his music, pieces of furniture chosen for comfort. Now it had been transformed into a sterile showcase. Sharp edges, glass, and cold metal filled the rooms, more like an exhibit than a home. Laughter echoed where it should not have. Samantha greeted me with air kisses, her perfume too strong, her smile too tight. "Evelyn, darling, so glad you could make it. White wine?" I refused politely and withdrew to a corner. This was not mourning, this was networking. Business associates exchanged cards, Samantha's fashionable friends clinked glasses. I felt like a stranger at my own son's wake. Finally, Jeffrey Palmer stood near the marble fireplace, opening a leather portfolio. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here for the reading of Daniel Harper's last will and testament." The room quieted. Samantha sat in the center of the sofa, her hand resting on the arm of a tall man I recognized vaguely as Julian Carter, one of Daniel's business partners. Jeffrey began to read. "To my wife Samantha Hayes Harper, I leave our primary residence, including all furnishings and artwork. Also my controlling shares in Harper Technologies, our vacation properties, and the yacht." Samantha smiled as though this were merely confirmation of what she already knew. Then Jeffrey's voice shifted. "To my mother, Evelyn Harper, I leave the enclosed item to be delivered immediately following this reading." My heart stuttered, waiting for something, anything of meaning. Instead, Jeffrey pulled a worn envelope from his case and handed it to me. "That is all," he said quietly. A ripple of laughter moved across the room. "The old woman gets an envelope," Samantha called out with a cruel lilt. How thoughtful of Daniel. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for my humiliation. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single first-class ticket to Lyon, France, with a connection to a small town I had never heard of. Departure was tomorrow morning. "A vacation," Samantha mocked. "Perhaps he thought you needed time far away." The words cut deep. My son had left me nothing but a plain ticket to nowhere while giving Samantha everything. Yet as I stared at the paper, I could not shake the strange weight of it, as if there were something Daniel wanted me to discover beyond the humiliation of that moment. That night I could not sleep. I sat in my small apartment, the envelope resting on the table like a riddle I had no way of solving. A ticket to Lyon, a destination scribbled in French that I could barely pronounce. I wanted to throw it away, to scream at the ceiling that my son had betrayed me by leaving me nothing. Yet deep down I knew Daniel. He had always been deliberate, never careless. If he had left me this, it meant something. I considered calling Jeffrey Palmer to demand answers, but I remembered the neutrality in his face. He knew no more than I did, or perhaps he knew and was sworn to silence. Either way, I could not stay in New York. Samantha would soon have the courts, the company, the headlines. She had already won in the eyes of the world. If I stayed, I would become invisible, the grieving mother who faded from view. But if I followed the ticket, maybe I would find the truth Daniel wanted me to see. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. I tucked inside a framed photograph of Daniel at 10 years old, grinning with a fishing pole taller than him. That picture was my anchor. At JFK Airport, I felt the stares of strangers as I navigated the terminal, an older woman alone with grief. They saw my age, my wrinkles, my slow steps, but not the storm inside me. The flight to Lyon was long. I stared at the Atlantic below and thought of Daniel's laughter, the way he used to call me Mama when no one else was listening. I remembered the nights I stayed up grading papers when I still taught English at the high school, Daniel asleep in the next room, his tiny hand clutching his toy cars. I had raised him through scraped knees, teenage defiance, and the pride of his first big promotion. To imagine that the life we built together ended in a boat accident was unbearable. When the plane landed, a driver held a card with my name. Harper, madame. His English was halting, but his smile was kind. He led me through winding countryside roads far from the bustle of the city, into rolling hills and vineyards. Finally, we arrived at a stone gate that opened onto an old estate. The air smelled of lavender and rain. As the car stopped, I saw a man waiting at the entrance. Tall, silver-haired, his posture straight despite the years. His eyes met mine, and something inside me cracked open. I knew that face, though decades had passed. My breath caught in my throat. It was Michael Beaumont, the man I had once loved with my whole heart, the man I thought I had lost forever. I stepped out of the car, my knees trembling as if I were a young woman again. For a moment, I could not move. The years had changed him. Silver now streaked through his hair, lines carved around his mouth, but those eyes, steady, dark and full of questions, were the same eyes I had memorized 40 years ago. "Evelyn," he whispered, my name falling from his lips as though he had rehearsed it in silence for decades. My throat closed, no sound escaping, only the sting of tears that blurred my vision. I had not seen Michael Beaumont since I was 22, since the summer I left Paris with a broken heart and a secret I never dared share. The sight of him now unraveled me. Inside the estate, the rooms were lined with bookshelves and worn furniture that spoke of a life fully lived. We sat across from each other in a room with tall windows overlooking the vineyards. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why am I here, Michael? What did Daniel want me to find?" His gaze faltered. "Evelyn, before I answer that, I need you to know something. Daniel came to see me." My chest tightened. Daniel was here. "Yes," Michael said softly. 2 months before the accident, he appeared at my door. He told me he was my son. He told me you were his mother." I felt the world tilt. The secret I had carried alone all my life was suddenly spoken aloud. I had never told Daniel the truth, that his father was not the man whose name he bore, but the boy I had loved in Paris. Michael continued, his voice steady but raw. He said he had questions, that he suspected danger in his own home. He needed me to know the truth before anything happened. My hands shook against the porcelain teacup I held, so he knew. He had pieced it together somehow. Daniel had always been perceptive. But the thought that he had been wandering Europe, seeking answers to questions I had buried, filled me with guilt. I should have told him myself. Michael reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Evelyn, Daniel was proud of you. He told me how you raised him alone, how you sacrificed. He didn't blame you for silence. He understood." His eyes glistened. He wanted us to find each other again if anything ever happened to him. That ticket was his way of making sure you would. I pressed my hand to my lips, holding back a sob. After decades of absence, the two men I loved most, my son and my first love, had conspired to bring me back here to this very moment. And though the grief of Daniel's death pressed heavily on me, a spark of something else stirred too. Hope, because if Daniel had trusted Michael, then perhaps the story was not finished yet. The next morning, I awoke in a guest room overlooking the misty vineyards. For a moment, I forgot why I was there. The air was fresh, the world so peaceful that grief felt like a distant dream. But then Daniel's face rushed back into my mind, and the ache returned. Downstairs, I found Michael waiting in the library, papers spread out across a heavy oak desk. He gestured for me to sit. "Evelyn, there are things you need to know. Daniel didn't just come here to find me. He came because he was afraid of his own wife." I froze, his words sinking in. "Samantha." He nodded gravely. "She wasn't the woman you believed her to be. She was involved with another man, Julian Carter. Together they were draining money from Harper Technologies, covering their tracks with shell accounts and forged documents. Daniel had discovered irregularities in the company ledgers. When he confronted her, she laughed in his face. That was when he came to me. He didn't trust anyone else." Michael handed me a folder. Inside were photocopies of bank transfers, correspondence, notes scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. The evidence was overwhelming. My son had uncovered a conspiracy in his own home. Tears blurred the ink as I whispered, "He must have been terrified. He was, Michael said quietly. But he was also determined. He wanted to protect you. He told me Samantha had been pressuring him to revise his will. She wanted control over everything, and he suspected she wouldn't stop at betrayal. He feared she was planning something darker. A chill ran through me. Are you saying? Michael looked away, his silence louder than words. My hands shook as I closed the folder. The accident. The boat. It wasn't an accident, was it? He finally met my eyes. Daniel believed if anything happened to him, it would not be chance. He left instructions. 2 wills, one public, one hidden. The first gave Samantha everything, because he knew she would expect it. The second placed the majority of his assets into a trust under your name and mine. I stared at him, speechless. Why mine? Why yours? Michael leaned forward, his voice almost breaking. Because he trusted us. Because he wanted to bring us together to repair what life had broken. And because he knew we would fight for the truth. The room spun as I tried to absorb it all. My son had prepared for his own death, anticipating betrayal from the woman he shared a bed with. He had carried this burden alone, and now it had fallen into my hands. My grief began to shift into something else: resolve. I would not let Samantha's cruelty define the end of Daniel's story. Michael touched my hand gently. There is more. Daniel left behind a clue. He spoke of a box, a green box he kept hidden in the old summer house on Cape Cod. He said everything we would need to expose Samantha and Julian was inside. That was where we must go next. I tightened my grip on the folder, the weight of Daniel's fight settling into my bones. My son had left me with more than grief. He had left me with a mission, and though fear pressed at the edges of my heart, I knew I could not turn away. If Samantha thought she had won, she was about to learn how wrong she was. 2 days later, Michael and I boarded a flight back to the United States. My hands trembled as I clutched the folder of documents Daniel had left behind. Every page felt like his voice speaking through the ink, urging me forward. The journey to Cape Cod was long, winding through quiet coastal roads until the summer house finally appeared on the horizon. Its white shutters and weathered shingles looked exactly as I remembered. This had once been our refuge, where Daniel spent his childhood summers chasing fireflies in the yard. Now it held the last secrets of his life. The key still worked. Dust lingered in the air as we stepped inside. Memories hit me like waves: the smell of old wood, the creak of the floorboards, the faded curtains my mother had sewn years ago. For a moment I wanted to collapse under the weight of nostalgia, but Michael's steady presence kept me moving. We searched each room methodically, pulling open drawers, shifting bookshelves, lifting floorboards. Hours passed. Nothing. Frustration clawed at me. I slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, my eyes landing on the worn chessboard Daniel and I used to play on summer nights. He had always been clever, strategic, leaving clues where no one else would think to look. My gaze shifted to the fireplace. Daniel once hid his allowance there when he was 12. Suddenly it struck me: the mantelpiece. I stood, heart racing, and ran my hand along the wooden beam. One corner was loose. I tugged, and a panel came free. Behind it sat a small green metal box. My knees buckled as I pulled it out, dust coating my fingers. Michael helped me set it on the table. Together we opened it. Inside were USB drives, handwritten journals, photographs, and a small recorder. Evidence. Proof of Samantha and Julian's betrayal. There were transcripts of phone calls, screenshots of transfers to offshore accounts, even a copy of an email where Julian wrote, "Once Daniel is gone, the company is ours." The words turned my blood cold. I pressed play on the recorder. Daniel's voice filled the room, steady but tired. "Mom, if you are hearing this, then you know I was right. Samantha and Julian cannot be trusted. Everything you need is here. Do not let them destroy what we built. And Mom, I'm sorry I never told you sooner about Michael. I wanted you to know the truth, and I wanted you both to find each other again. If I cannot be there, at least you won't be alone." Tears spilled down my face as Michael placed a hand over mine. His eyes burned with the same mixture of grief and determination. We had what we needed, but the danger was real. We could not let Samantha or Julian discover we were here. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside froze us in place. Headlights cut through the window. I peeked through the curtain and my breath caught. A sleek black car had pulled up. Samantha stepped out in a tailored coat, Julian close behind. They were here. Somehow they had known. Michael whispered, "Hide the box." "Now." I shoved it back into the mantel just as the front door swung open. Samantha's voice rang out, sharp and cold. Well, looks like the grieving mother and the long-lost lover decided to play detective. How touching. But you're too late." Samantha's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she strode into the living room, Julian following close behind. Her eyes swept the room, sharp and calculating, before settling on me. "Evelyn," she said with a smirk, "I should have guessed you'd come sniffing around. Always desperate to feel important." Julian chuckled under his breath, his hand tightening possessively around Samantha's arm. Michael stepped between us, his voice steady. "You have no right to be here. This house belongs to Evelyn." Samantha laughed, a hollow sound that echoed against the walls. "Oh, please, everything belongs to me now." Daniel made sure of it. "You're both clinging to the scraps of a life that's over." Her words cut deep, but I refused to flinch. I met her gaze. "Daniel trusted me. He left something here, and you know it. That's why you came." For a moment, her smile faltered, then hardened again. Julian moved toward the fireplace, his eyes narrowing as if he sensed the hiding place. My pulse raced. If he opened the mantle, everything would be lost. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Don't bother, Julian. You won't find what you're looking for." My heart stopped. I turned, my knees weak. Standing in the doorway was Daniel. Alive. I gasped, the world tilting. "Daniel?" My voice cracked. He stepped into the light, his hair a little longer, his face thinner, but it was him. My son. He opened his arms, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight of hope crush my chest. Tears blurred my sight as I stumbled toward him. "Mom," he whispered, holding me close. "I'm here. I never left you." Samantha's face drained of color. "No, this isn't possible. You're dead. We saw the reports." Daniel's eyes were cold as he looked at her. "That's what you were meant to believe. The accident was staged. I worked with federal agents to disappear long enough to gather everything I needed. You and Julian walked right into the trap." Julian snarled, grabbing Samantha's wrist. "This is a trick." But even as he spoke, red and blue lights flashed outside. The sound of car doors slamming followed. FBI agents stormed the house, their voices commanding, "Hands where we can see them." Within moments, Samantha and Julian were handcuffed, their arrogance crumbling into panic. Samantha screamed, thrashing against the agents. "This isn't fair. He loved me." Daniel's jaw clenched. "No, Samantha. You loved money. You loved power. You never loved me." As they were let out, the weight of months of deception lifted from my chest. I turned back to Daniel, my tears flowing freely. "I thought I lost you." He squeezed my hands. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry, I had to protect you." "I had to protect Dad, too." He glanced toward Michael, his voice softening. "I wanted us to be a family, even if it meant walking through fire first." In that moment, standing in the old summer house with my son alive and Michael by my side, I realized the nightmare was ending. The truth had survived, justice had arrived, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe in beginnings again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of the Cape Cod house. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed without the weight of dread pressing on my chest. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as though he had never been gone, as though his funeral had only been a bad dream. Michael poured himself a cup, his movements calm and steady, but I could see the relief etched across his face. I joined them, my heart full yet fragile. I still reached out to touch Daniel's arm every few minutes, needing the reassurance that he was real. He laughed gently. "Mom, I'm not going anywhere." I held his hand, unwilling to let go. I told him everything, the nights I cried alone, the guilt I carried for not telling him about Michael, the emptiness of that cruel will reading. He listened quietly, then said, "You were never alone, Mom. I did all this for you. For us." Michael spoke then, his voice softer than I remembered from our youth. "We lost so many years, Evelyn. But Daniel gave us this second chance." He looked at me with those familiar eyes, and the decades between us dissolved. The bitterness of the past no longer mattered. What mattered was that Daniel was alive, and somehow, impossibly, the three of us were together. We spent the day walking along the shoreline, the sea air cool against our faces. Daniel told us about the months he spent hidden, the agents who helped him build his case, the loneliness of pretending to be dead while the world mourned him. He admitted how hard it was to imagine my grief, but he had trusted I would follow the clue he left. "You were always the strongest person I knew, Mom," he said. "I believed you would find me in the end." As the sun dipped low over the ocean, painting the water in streaks of gold, I realized something profound. Out of betrayal had come truth. Out of loss had come reunion. Out of grief had come love reborn. Daniel leaned into me, Michael's arm rested lightly around my shoulders, and I felt whole in a way I had not known for decades. For the first time since Daniel's death or supposed death, I allowed myself to dream about tomorrow, not just surviving but living, together. Weeks later, the whirlwind of trials and headlines began to settle. Samantha and Julian faced charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence Daniel collected was undeniable, and their polished facades crumbled under the weight of truth. The world finally saw them for what they were, greedy, hollow people who had mistaken love for possession. Justice, though delayed, had come. But for me, the real story was not about the courtroom victories or the frozen assets. It was about something quieter, something far more precious. It was about having my son back, about walking into a kitchen and hearing his voice again. It was about sitting on a porch with Michael, the man I once loved, and realizing that love had not withered with time, it had simply been waiting for us to return. Daniel's courage had given us back what life and lies had stolen. That, to me, was the true miracle. I often think back to the day of Daniel's supposed funeral, how powerless and humiliated I felt as Samantha laughed at the envelope in my hands. She believed that ticket to France was a cruel joke. But what she could never understand was that love speaks in whispers, not in grand gestures. Daniel knew I would follow that clue because he knew me. He trusted that even in my grief I would not give up. That single act of faith from my son changed everything. Looking back now, I see the lessons woven through the pain. First, that greed can strip people of their humanity, but it cannot erase the truth. Second, that silence may separate us from those we love, but it is never too late to speak, to reveal, to reconcile. And third, that strength is not found in standing tall without scars, but in walking forward despite them. I still grieve for the months I believed Daniel was gone. Nothing can erase the nights I cried myself to sleep, but those nights also remind me how fragile and sacred our connections are. I hold my son closer now, and I speak the words I once left unspoken. I love you, I am proud of you, and I will never take you for granted again. And to Michael, I finally said the words I had carried in silence for 40 years. I never stopped loving you. His smile, lined with age but warm as the sun, was all the answer I needed. So here I am, telling you this story not just to relive the pain, but to share the hope. If you are listening, perhaps you too have known betrayal. Perhaps you too have felt the sting of being overlooked, discarded, or forgotten. I want you to remember this: sometimes the smallest thread, a single clue, can lead you back to love, to truth, to a life worth living. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Press the like button if you believe that truth will always outlast lies. And please, subscribe to The Art of Revenge. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled, and I want to know if it reached the hearts that needed it most. Because in the end, this isn't just my story. It's a reminder for all of us. No matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how heavy the grief, there is always a way back to love, to justice, and to family.